This is the Community Builder Podcast, Episode 8. Hello, I'm your host, Travis King. Coming up on this episode, I sit down with David Spinks. David is the CEO of CMX Media, an organization dedicated to helping community professionals thrive. CMX supports thousands of organizations with the education and frameworks they need to build successful and meaningful communities. David is a frequent speaker at events around the world and advises organizations like Facebook and Google on community technology and education. Let's get into the show. Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is Travis King here, the host of the Community Builder Show, and I'm a community builder and human connector. Today, we have David Spinks, the founder of CMX Media, with us to share his insights on community building. Hey, David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Travis.
Yeah, of course. I'm super excited to kind of pick your brain with your tremendous experience in community building and, just kind of have this amazing conversation and hopefully learn a thing or two from you with what you've done so far.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Cool. So yeah, let's, I guess if you wouldn't mind sharing with everyone kind of what you're up to, like what CMX, kind of what you're up to over there.
Yeah, absolutely. So CMX is an organization that provides education and membership for community professionals. So anyone who's building community on a professional level could be for-profits, nonprofits, political movements, anyone who's, organizing people, bringing them together, connecting them to each other. We are kind of a central organization that hosts, a big conference once a year, develops training, models, frameworks, educational standards for people to be able to do this work at scale and to help each other.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That's super helpful. And I guess speaking of community, what drew you to community in the first place? Like, how'd you get started in the community world?
Yeah. How far back do you want to go?
Let's go to childhood. Let's hear the early memories.
Yeah. Both my parents were immigrants. My mom was born in Israel. My dad was born in Ireland. Moved to New York after they got married in Israel, and I was born a year later. I kind of had an interesting upbringing where I was in Long Island, suburbs of New York City, and had two parents who were brand new to the country, had no jobs here, no real connections, they were basically building their own community and their network from the ground up and their lives from the ground up. And they cared a lot about me and my sister, who was born 4.5 years later, fitting in and belonging. And I think they probably translated that strong need to belong to me. They were signing me up for every sports team and club and program and setting up play dates and connections for me. And it became kind of something I really craved, was to be included and to belong, to be accepted, to be seen as cool. And I wanted it so bad, but as it turns out in childhood, especially in middle school and high school, the more you want something, the more desperate you are for it, the harder it can be to get. And so I really struggled to fit in a lot of ways. I dealt with anti-Semitism. I dealt with a lot of bullying. I kind of hopped around from group to group. I wasn't good at getting made fun of. I didn't take it well. I didn't take it in stride, which obviously makes bullies give it to you harder. So belonging was something that I really struggled with as a kid. And it was part of what kind of sculpted who I am today, was those struggles to really fit in. It made me pay attention a lot, though. Why do people fit in? Why do they connect? Why does somebody seem cool where other people don't? And, I would hop around from group to group, and I was kind of the kid that would be in a different group every day. I was friends. I would have a group of friends in the sports team. I would have a group of friends. We used to go to like hardcore rock shows and go into mosh pits. I was in Model Congress. I kind of tested out all these different groups to see where I would fit in, and failed at most of them, but I was learning a lot from each one. And I always really enjoyed the idea of bridging groups. For some reason, it was always the most exciting to me when I could host a birthday party and bring different groups who weren't really connected and interacting together into a space and see how they interact and see how they mesh or don't mesh. That ultimately led me to become really involved in online communities, because where I failed to find connections and inclusion offline, this was when IRC was big. It was the very early days of console gaming when PlayStation 2 first went online. I played a lot of online video games. And, there were the old platforms, Live Journal, Dead Journal. I was all over all of that because it was this way of connecting with people where they didn't know who you were. They didn't know what your baggage was. They didn't know if you were cool or not. They only saw you for what they're seeing online. And that was empowering to me. And so I became pretty interested in how technology was changing the way people connect and gave people an opportunity to develop relationships and a sense of community in a way that wasn't before possible. And that just kind of carried on all through college, all through MySpace and Facebook, and then Twitter launched. And every time these platforms launched, I became really interested and active in them. And that ultimately led me to take on a job as a community manager right out of college. And so my first job was a community manager. This was in 2009. And there was no guidance for how to do this work because it was so new. There was no training or framework for how to do community management. And that's what ultimately led to starting CMX about 5 years later, after figuring it out myself for all those years and connecting with, eventually thousands of people who are doing similar kind of work, but all just figuring it out on their own. I developed a good network of the people who are doing this work. I learned a lot just by failing over and over again. And eventually started CMX as a platform to bring all the people who are doing this work together and provide them that support.
Wow, that is a powerful story if I've ever heard one. Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing that. And actually, I'm very curious, what was that breakthrough moment, right? Where you decided that, enough was enough. I'm going to, be a member of something, right? Like I belong. Like when did that happen for you?
It's interesting the way you phrase the question. Because I don't think it's like something you choose. You don't get to choose to belong. Other people get to choose that. And so in my mind, I always should have belonged, right? I never understood why I wasn't accepted. If anything, that was like the journey that I have been on, and in many ways I'm still on, is figuring out what it means to belong and what it means for people to accept you and how to be accepted. It's an interesting question because you don't get to choose that. Other people choose that. So it's kind of out of your control in a lot of ways. And I think the mistake I've made time and time and time again was trying to answer that question by seeing it that way of, oh, this must be me. This must be something I'm doing. So let me just keep changing myself. Let me keep changing my identity. Let me keep changing how I dress, how I talk, how I treat people, the things I'm involved in. And maybe that will make people accept me. And as I guess every story like this tells you in the end, it's not about changing yourself, but rather just being who you are and being comfortable in your own skin. And that's what attracts people to you. And I think I feel more comfortable in my own skin today than I ever have before, and have just continued to be on that journey. And I'm fortunate to be in a place today that I have an incredible sense of community, whether that's my friends. I have some amazing friends that I love and love me, and we have something really special. My family is really close, or my work and my larger network and the CMX community that we're building. I'm rich in community today, which I'm extremely grateful for, and I think I'm lucky for. But I think a lot of that comes from being comfortable in your own skin.
Oh, I love that. And it definitely circles back to the idea of when you were younger, hopping around often. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people struggle with now, right? Like they might try to find, some group that they like or try to find some sort of interest. But I feel like people still hop around. Like, what is there any advice that you could give to people that are hopping around and like in search of finding something? Like, what would you tell those people? Yeah, I was gonna say anything that you could think of that, like maybe a conversation you had with someone when you were younger, or because I know a lot of times, like my mom always knows what to say, no matter what the situation. She can always make me feel better, and I don't know, moms just have that gift.
It's a really powerful gift. For me, it's hard to say. Like, I only know my own experience with it, and where I've ended up is somewhat of a like a chameleon in that I do feel comfortable in a lot of different kinds of communities and different situations. I can kind of adapt how I interact with somebody based on who they are. I can kind of mimic their pace and their tone, which is effective at making them feel comfortable. I think it's hard to find the places you belong, and especially if you move to a new city, you experience it in a new way. This idea of like not having the comfort of existing relationships and established networks, and it takes time to develop, right? Like sometimes you move or you join a new community online and you kind of expect it right away to be like, all right, I fit in and I'm thriving and this is great and I have friends in this network. But relationships aren't built that way. They're built over time. They're built through shared struggles and stories that develop over years. I think if you're still struggling to find your community, learning to be patient and just constantly moving in the direction of where you do feel accepted and you feel safe and you feel like you can be yourself, right? Like from a community builder's perspective, I think the ultimate job of a community builder is to know who your members are. What is that identity that you're trying to bring together, and create a space that they feel comfortable and safe and excited to be themselves in that space. And if you've done that, then you've created a space where people can truly feel a sense of belonging and shared identity and be themselves because they feel safe being exactly who they are and not having to change themselves. And so from the member perspective, I think that's what we're all looking for, is spaces where we can be, some version of ourselves, right? Because we might change whether you're interacting with family or friends or your coworkers, you might adapt. But in those spaces, you're trying to find an environment that you feel safe being yourself. And once you find those things, give it time, be patient and let it develop. And just don't be afraid to put yourself out there and experience these things with other people, even if it's awkward or uncomfortable or a little bit of a struggle, because that's the kind of stuff that will shape your relationships in your community over time.
Perfect. No, I think that's extremely valuable advice. And I think even kind of moving a little bit of what you said about the not finding comfort and being, new to a city. I think one thing that has definitely helped me is like sports leagues, right? Like I joined a flag football team. And now realizing, looking back on it, I'm like, wow, like I knew one person and this one person brought me into a group and a community of 15, 20 other people, which then expanded and helped me launch new friendships. So I definitely think that point is great to make. I think it's like a hidden gem, right? Like we're all connected to football in some way. So the fact that we're just on this team together just gives me that sense of belonging. And it definitely helps ease the waters when you're moving into a new city.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of you want to put yourself in a position where you're having repeat interactions with the same people. I think that's ideal. I think the trouble that people, they go to like at a bar or going out or randomly at a library or something, and that can work, right? Like sometimes that can work if you really hit it off, but it's hard because it's a one-off interaction in a moment. No one's necessarily there to be invested in each other. And so it's hard to develop a relationship, learn about each other, right? Like first impressions are almost always wrong. One of my best friends in the world right now was my roommate. And when my other roommate was recommending that he join our apartment, I actually was like, I don't think that's a good idea. Because my first impression of this guy was he was like a little wild, a little crazy. Because the last time he visited, he just partied really hard and kind of went loose. That was his, in that moment, visiting that day. It was Beta Breakers in San Francisco. It was like a wild time. So I only got to see him. And, he ended up moving in and over time just really got to know each other. And, he was just at my wedding party. He was one of my groomsmen. Like we became so close over time. So I think that was it for me too. When I first moved to San Francisco, I moved into this apartment that I found on Craigslist, and I chose it based on the people that were living there seemed like people I would hang out with, but I didn't know any of them. But, we lived together. So you have constant repeat interaction, and that doesn't mean you're going to be friends with that's going to be your community, but it gives you a chance to really see. And those three people ended up becoming three of my best friends in the world. One of the guys there was another person who was one of my groomsmen. One of the ladies I lived with became my co-founder in my last business. And the third person is she's another one of my best friends, and her husband ended up officiating my wedding. Like, I can't say enough how much of this one like apartment I found on Craigslist became my true community. And I'm really grateful that we had that time to live together and have those repeat interactions and experiences and stories that develop over time rather than in one moment.
Wow. You know what's so funny about that? I also found my quote unquote apartment, but my flag football team from Craigslist. That's insane.
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah,
Craigslist
no,
doing
I've
more than
always
just
been
posting classifieds.
look, I mean, there's a lot of talk right now of social media and how, community is dying. And I've even been guilty of being pretty negative lately about the impact that social media and technology is having on our sense of community. But I'm an example of where it can really help someone thrive in community. And it's done so much for me in finding community and developing my career and network and learning that I can be cool and belong and be included early on in life when, as a kid, you really only had access to the kids in your town, but I had access to this whole world of people through video games and online networks. It can create a true sense of community.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important because like you just mentioned, like we're more connected than ever. And I think we've been using the tools wrong. What I mean by that is instead of looking at like these online places like Facebook, Instagram as like the places that we should be, it's like I feel like if we just look at it as a starting point and realizing that these things like the Craigslist example that we just mentioned, that sparked friendships that are now growing and living offline. I think that's one of the key things I think people need to remember is that like don't become crippled by these tools that are here to help us. They're essentially just ways for us to connect faster with everyone, but then also to give you more opportunities to create these offline conversations with people in real life.
Yeah, I think both are possible. I think you can develop a true sense of community with people that you only know online, because I did that with video games. And again, video games, it's a repeat, consistent interaction over time, right? So the people I got to know by playing video games weren't just people I saw once in a Twitter stream. It wasn't even people I followed, so it's just like a one way. It was interactive. I had interactions and shared experiences with them over more than a year, and we would see each other every day in these rooms where we play together, and we'd have tournaments together, and we develop clans and battles, and there was controversy and challenges, and there were trolls that everybody knew, and there were cool people that everyone knew, right? You develop these stories, the thing that happens in any community, because you have that shared interaction over time on a repetitive way. But there's a culture component of it too. And in that video game, I look back at some of those like forums that were some images were saved from it. Like those people were assholes. They were racist and assholes and mean and trolly back then. Like video games has always been that way. Now it's kind of bled into stream, and now everyone's on these networks and getting this fire hose of content. And those kinds of messages aren't isolated to these video game forums. Like one message can now spread to millions of people in an instant. And so I think we haven't figured out how to coexist in these extremely large connected spaces yet.
Totally. No, that's a great point. That's a very, very great point. Actually, one thing, I know this is a little bit different than video games, but I would love to hear about your take on how an important topic like community can be built with brands. Like, so in businesses, right? Like it's tough to say like, hey, everybody meet up around my technology, and that's building a real sense of community, right? Like it's tough for some brands to not push their messages. So like how can brands help fuel this sort of nice repeat interactions without trying to push their message in front of everybody? Because I feel like sometimes when there's a brand behind a community, people get, turned off a little bit.
Yeah. It's an interesting challenge. It's funny. I was just reading an old blog post, like my blog from 2010 was basically down for the last 8 years. I got an email notification saying like I need to fix something if it wanted to go up. So I just fixed it and it came up. And then I just got in this hole of reading old blog posts.
That's fun.
It's funny to see, 8 years ago talking about the same shit. And I wish I used better language back then. But
hey, we learned, right?
Yeah, exactly. I definitely read like idiot low 20s with a cocky attitude. But I think the reason that came up for me is there was an article where I was writing about Dan Ariely wrote a book called Predictably Irrational on behavioral economics. And he talks about how I might butcher the terminology here, but it was we have these kind of market interactions and we have social interactions. And so our social interactions are things that we do for other people because of the social capital of sorts, or the reputation, or just the relationships you have, right? If a friend asks you to help them move, you're going to help them move because they're your friend. You're not going to say, well, this is how much my time is worth. If you're hosting your family over for Thanksgiving dinner, you're going to cook the meal and buy the turkey and do everything. You're not going to ask everyone to pitch in $20 when they arrive. You're just doing it because it's your family and it's, that social interaction. A market interaction it basically uses a different part of your brain, and it's when it's transactional. So if at that same point where a friend is asking you to help them move, and they say, "Hey, can you help me move? I'll give you $200." As soon as they've now applied that value to that interaction, now you start thinking, well, $200, is it worth that to me? How much is my time worth? And it makes it into this market interaction. And so we have these interactions in the world, these two different kinds of interactions in the world, and we treat them very differently and we value them differently. And we don't even think of the social stuff as a transaction, and we don't even think of the transaction as social. It can be kind of black and white in that way. And so when a business is trying to build community, where the struggle comes, I think, is they're trying to act like these are social interactions when they're market interactions. They're trying to treat people like friends and family when there's a dollar amount assigned to that interaction. And it's interesting because I've been in this industry for 10 years and we're still having the same struggle today as community professionals to get budget, to get buy-ins, is to prove ROI. How do you prove the ROI of community? And it's like the very premise of that question violates the single rule of community, which is that it's not about ROI. At the same time, every community we've ever had has to be sustainable to some perspective, right? Like religion, you need to pay for the churches and the ceremonies and the priests and the rabbis and everybody who's involved. It needs to be sustainable, or else it won't continue to exist. So they have donations and they have ways of making sure they're capital efficient. Anything, nonprofits, AA, Burning Man even needs to be financially sustainable, or else it can't continue.
Right.
And so I don't have a great answer there yet. And it's, I think, one of the key questions in my journey, in my career, that I'm still exploring is where do these things meet? Because I think at the same time, it is possible for a brand to really care and to really develop social relationships. And it's also possible for them to develop the market network, a transactional network that people still like and participate in, and their rewards are clear, and that's fine, right? Like you feel a sense of community with your employer, and that's a transactional relationship. But like it's one day you're probably going to leave because it's transactional. When that no longer makes sense for you, you're going to leave. So there's some sort of blend there and some sort of approach and mentality and understanding that very few brands have figured out yet. But I do think it's possible.
Got it. No, that's a very, I think it's a very important question right now, because I forget what article I was reading, but it mentioned how there's a ton of missed opportunity on the table for brands if they're able to actually figure out how to build these social interactions, right? That's like thinking of a brand like Nike, for example, just trying to support a community of people in a random city just because they want to, help them build community. And it's like, how would you even begin to try to tell, a marketer at that company that, this is great for the community, but there's no ROI behind it, right? Like, I totally feel like that question is going to take a while for us to answer.
Yeah. I read a quote today actually that feels relevant here. It was Tim O'Reilly, founder of O'Reilly Media, wrote an article about like some of his biggest mistakes. It's super good. And he talked about a business's relationship with cash. And most of this section was actually about how important it is for, especially for founders, and to make sure you have a good CFO to make sure that you really, really understand the cash flow of your business. You understand where money's coming in. You understand when it's going out and how that's going to affect you and how you can grow. And you have to pay really close attention to it. But in that same article, he was saying that when he would communicate to people the importance of cash, he had a quote that was like, cash is the gas for your car, right? It's the thing that will keep it going. But a road trip is a lot more than just driving from gas station to gas station.
Right.
And that really resonated to me with this idea that, yes, you need cash. Yes, you need to be sustainable. Yes, you need gas in the tank. But what you do around that, assuming you have gas in the tank and you're able to be sustainable and healthy, your road trip is about exploration and creation and seeing new things and helping people, right? It's your business can be so much more than just cash flow is a fundamental resource that needs to be there. But assuming you are able to figure that out, that's not what needs to drive every decision. The flip side of that is I'm kind of skeptical, right? Because having been through this grind and being a CEO myself, it's hard to invest in things that aren't showing ROI, especially at an early stage when you're establishing the culture that, say you are successful, you're building that belief system early. And it's just hard to invest in things that you can't prove the ROI because you're just trying to stay alive.
Right. No, I think that's, again, extremely important for people, especially when they're thinking about starting communities. Because I think that's one thing that might hold some people back, right? Like they might know that it's such an essential need to build a community, but they don't really know where to start or they don't really have the funding to do so. So it's like, what do? Do they just go join a community? Do they just forget about it? Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, I think there's an interesting trend now of businesses becoming really decentralized. So, we're seeing it in cryptos as like ultimate decentralization, where the very like development and platforms that our technology is built on is becoming decentralized. Open source obviously has been around a long time, but everything collaborative consumption, right? Like Airbnb is driven by hosts, Lyft is driven by drivers, all open source projects driven by their developers, all crypto is driven by their ecosystem, all social networks driven by the people who are posting and the influencers on the platform. Businesses are because, which essentially means that it's not the employees and the team creating all the value. They're building a lot of the structure, perhaps, or they're the spark that's like creating this movement. But the actual value of the business is being driven by contributors. This large amount of contributors who are creating, either creating or contributing homes or code or Duolingos, all developed by their community. And you can learn any language on there, and all their language classes are developed by the community. And so as this trend is happening, those contributors, as the people, the community that's creating value on the platform, are becoming extremely important. But businesses are just now learning that community is how you keep those people engaged. It's how you should see those people. They are a community of people who are contributing, oftentimes for free, or there's rev share or something. But your success as a business will be driven by how engaged are those people, how loyal are those people, how successful are they at contributing to the platform, and how you support them. And so I think when that is how your business is working, that's how it functions, community is starting to become a little bit more clear of a fit.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was on Twitter earlier and I saw I think it was something that you might have retweeted. about the like the effect of a power user in a community
Yeah.
and kind of how that measures. I guess could you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about your take on that? And because there's people always looking to create VIP programs or have influencers, but like, what's your take on the effect of a power user inside of a community?
Every community is going to have this spectrum of, consumer to a creator, right? The people who are creating value and the people who are consuming value. And you can see that in any community, right? In a city, you have all the people who are contributing in these specific areas, whether it's food or government or, cleaning the city or volunteering. You have all these people who are contributing. And then there's people who consume those things. They eat the food, they use the roads that get fixed, they participate, but they're probably contributing value in somewhere else. It's a large ecosystem, like a city. But in other communities, it's more straightforward, right? There's going to be a small group of people that are creating most of the value, and then a whole lot of people who are consuming that value, right? Like look at Wikipedia. There's a very small group of people comparatively that are writing all the articles and editing all the articles that the other 99% of people are just consuming and reading and not really contributing value there. Now, if those editors were to disappear, even though they're a very small group, the entire platform would go kaput. It would lose its value. It would no longer be useful. And so it's extremely important that Wikipedia keeps those editors really engaged and happy and loyal and focused and helps them be successful on the platform. And that's the same for every network, right? There's the 99-1 rule or the 80-20 rule, which aren't really rules, but basically both of them say that there's a small percentage of people that are going to be creating most of the content and most of the value on the platform. And so that post that was by Andrew Chen, who is a growth marketer. He's like one of the biggest experts on growth in the world. So it's really cool to see him writing about power users and the idea of growth being driven by focusing on your most valuable contributors, the people who are creating the most value in your network. And it was interesting. He graphed out how it actually looks different depending on the kind of business you are, right? Some of them might be a smile shape of the graph because what he did was he mapped it out over 30 days and it says how many people have been active one day out of the last 30 days. How many people have been active 2 days out of the last 30 days, and so on all the way to 30. And so if it's a smile, that means a lot of people have been just a little bit active, and then a lot of people have been really active. And that's what something like Facebook looks like. And so understanding the kind of business you are and how important it is to have those really key power users is important. And assuming that is important to you, that you do have this network where there's a small group of people creating a huge amount of the value, it's going to be critical for you to make sure that those people are engaged. And
Totally. That's amazing. I think that's super important, right? Like making sure that you help support kind of basically it's like you're showing what your community, what success looks like in the form of users, right? Basically saying, hey, David joined this community, back in 2009. He's been an active contributor. He uses the platform regularly, and he's, someone that you'd look up to figure out what success looks like in this community and kind of how we do things here.
Yeah, it sets a good example for other members to follow as well, right? Like the Yelp Elite's one of the classic examples, and they've done an incredible job of saying, all you have to do is be a good reviewer on our platform, be active, post quality reviews. And if you hit a certain level, you can become a Yelp Elite member. And that's going to give you access to events and perks and benefits and all this fun stuff. And really spotlight their power users. And that becomes an example for others who, may strive to one day become a leader in the community in the same way.
Totally. So we're actually winding down. I got time for one more question and kind of want to go a little bit back and kind of let you take a second to think about your life and think about one moment in your life that positively impacted you. What was that and why was it so important?
Just one.
Yeah, just one.
Well, I just got married 3 weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
So I feel like that's, I'm obliged to talk about that.
Yeah, she might get mad at you if you don't.
Exactly. Yeah, I thought that it was a really powerful experience. And a lot of people have been asking me, how was your wedding? And it's kind of a hard question to answer. And probably people expect me to just say, oh, it was great. But they get a deep answer every time because they ask me. So screw them. They're going to get a deep answer. And it's a pretty incredible, it's very surreal. And I describe it like you died and you went to, whatever heavenly kind of place you might go after you die. And you're going, walking to the gates or whatever it is. And it's just like when you show up to the top of the aisle, when you're walking down for your wedding, you look around and it's just every single person from your life that you know and love the most, childhood and where you live now, where you used to live in college and your family from across the ocean. And all these people somehow have arrived here at the same time and they're all dressed beautifully and they're staring at you with these big awkward grins and watching you walk down the aisle and you're dressed, dope as fuck. You're just looking your best and the sun is shining and it's just very surreal. And then you walk down and then the person you love most in the world shows up at the end of the aisle and you watch everyone's reaction to them and they look beautiful. It's just is otherworldly. It didn't feel like you were there. It felt like you left your body a little bit. And it's this interesting from a community perspective, of course. I can't help but think about that. It's just this amazing moment where so much of what you've developed as far as community is condensed into this 6 hours. And it creates this just extremely memorable peak moment in your life that I guess has changed my opinion a little bit of weddings, where before I was definitely on the let's just keep this cheap, small, and simple. But I can understand why people make a big deal out of it because it really does create this period of time, this moment in time that I don't think I'll ever forget.
Wow. I don't know what was more powerful, the wedding or the opening?
Well, it's full circle then.
Yeah. No, it was definitely full circle for sure. Well, yeah, David, I really appreciate you, taking the time to speak with us, about community, tell us a little bit about your story and share some of the insights that you've learned along the way. And for anyone that wants to connect with you, kind of how can they do that?
Yeah. So, I'm at David Spinks on Twitter, which has been my social network of choice, although lately I've been creating some space between me and my friend Twitter. Sorry. But we're CMX, so you can find us at cmxhub.com. If you'd like to become a member of CMX and get access to our training and connect with all the other people doing this work, go to cmxhub.com/pro. And that's our membership program. And you can also we have a ton of free resources on the website, and our free Facebook group is CMX Hub as well. It's an amazing community of all people who are doing this work for a living. So hope you'll all join us in our community as well.
Awesome. And do you have any upcoming events or anything like that, conferences?
Yes, we do. We have CMX Summit, happens once a year. This year it's happening on October 1st to 3rd in Portland, Oregon. We have over 400 community professionals, tons of amazing speakers, workshops, fun activities and parties. It's our big project every year, and it gets better every year. It's going to be a really good time. Cool. You can find that at cmxhub.com/summit.
Awesome. So I'll make sure I go ahead and link out to all these in the show notes. You got it. Well, thanks again, David. I really appreciate you hopping on. And until next time.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Community Builder Podcast with Travis King. If you like the show and want to know more, check out communitybuildershow.com or feel free to leave us a review on iTunes. Join us next week when I sit down with Claire Wasserman.